Hi, everyone. Welcome to the NACDA Data on Aging podcast series. Today, we are talking with Dr. Wassim Tarraf, and he is professor of gerontology at Wayne State University's Institute of Gerontology and in the Department of Healthcare Sciences. As a gerontologist, methodologist, and applied statistician, the primary focus of his research program is on the aging U.S. population, with a particular focus on cognitive aging. Dr. Tarraf has extensive experience researching and evaluating health outcomes, cognitive function, and brain biomarkers and health behavior, and investigating the biopsychosocial determinants of health and healthcare among older adults. He is an investigator on several NIA-funded ancillary studies of the Hispanic Community Health Study, study of Latinos, also known as HCHS, SOL, such as the I guess we can call it SOL, Investigation of Neurocognitive Aging, SOL-INCA, examining sociocultural, cardiovascular, and sleep risk factors for cognitive and brain aging. Dr. Tarraf, you have a lot that you are involved in. Additionally, he co-leads the Michigan Center for African American Aging Research Analytics Core and the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease Community Liaison and Recruitment Core. In his work, Dr. Tarraf also uses publicly available secondary resources that are federally funded, such as the Health and Retirement Study and federally administered medical expenditures panel study. Okay, so thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great.
All these things, they're a mouthful, and I just
yeah,
noticed that listening to
it
you
was a
speak.
lot to read through, but it's good. It's a good thing. It means that we will have a lot of interesting things to talk about.
Yeah.
So, we normally like to ask our interviewees just about their path, how they got where they are, because part of our goal with this is to help other researchers, no matter where they are in their career, kind of understand, the work that goes into, successful gerontologist work, And so why don't you talk about how you got involved with your research, whether that's, at, the Institute of Gerontology, or if you want to focus on the Hispanic Community Health Study,
Yeah,
whatever you choose.
thanks for this question, Catherine. I think I'll keep it focused on the Hispanic Community Health Study because that's takes up a substantial amount of my time as a researcher. So I have been very fortunate in my career. I've been working with a primary collaborator who is a true mentor of mine, and over time evolved to becoming a collaborator, Dr. Hector Gonzalez, who used to be at the Institute of Gerontology, but now is a professor of neurosciences at the University of California, San Diego. And I've been working with Dr. Gonzalez for nearly 2 decades, and got connected through this work to the Hispanic Community Health Study when I was doing my postdoc research in gerontology at the Institute of Gerontology with him. And this has evolved into a career of fruitful collaborations and really an expansion of my research network to several ancillary studies, some of which you mentioned, that are focused on cognitive and brain aging. So I've been very fortunate in that regard, in that I found someone that is, to some extent, a soulmate in research that I've been able to kind of maintain long-term collaborative relationship with.
Oh, wow. That's so nice. Yes, a good mentor makes all the difference.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, how about we talk about the central objectives of your recent work with the Hispanic Community Health Study?
Thanks again for that question. So the majority of the work that I do focuses on identifying potentially modifiable risk factors. Initially, through the study of Latinos, investigation of neurocognitive aging, what we call the SOL-INCA. And initially, we were interested in particular links to early stages of cognitive disease, including mild cognitive impairment and accelerated cognitive decline, all at the population level. Um, but now with new data collection efforts that sprung from the SOL-INCA, we're moving to focus on kind of more advanced disease stages, so identifying dementia cases and the life course risk factors that are associated with dementia. SOL-INCA really has created the basis for several ancillary studies. And by ancillary studies, I mean kind of sister studies or studies that spring from the original study. And I should say here that the parent study for all this is the Hispanic Community Health Study, study of Latinos. So yes, it created the basis for several of these ancillary studies, and I give you two examples. So I now collaborate, for example, on a study that is examining the role of sleep in cognitive impairment and dementia. In addition, we have a major effort focused on collecting plasma biomarkers to try to investigate the role of these biomarkers in early stages of disease. And a third study that is focused on brain MRI markers that is led by Dr. Charlie DeCarli at the University of California, Davis, all focused on this excellent cohort that was built by the principal investigators of the parent study, the Hispanic Community Health Study, with immense effort to establish presence, to establish long-term connections, really to build trust in the communities that we study. So this is not news, but what I do is really impossible to achieve if I was not introduced early on to a team science, and if I did not grow up professionally in an environment that fosters that kind of work. I've also been very fortunate because I'm part of several center grants. I think a couple of those you mentioned that have had a mission to train the next generation of scientists, including two resource centers for minority aging research that are at the University of Michigan, the MUCWAR, Michigan, in short, the Michigan Center on Urban African American Aging Research, which is led by Dr. Robert Taylor and Dr. Peter Lichtenberg, and the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease, which is led by Dr. Christina Żuś, Tony Antonucci, and Laura Zahadny. So it, I can't emphasize enough the importance of growing up in a tradition of team science and how important that was for me in my career.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that theme in talking with other researchers. And Peter Lichtenberg, he was on our NACDA steering committee some years ago when we were under a different grant mechanism. And we've actually spoken with him about his wallet study for this series. And so it's great to talk with him. And Robert Taylor, we've done a webinar with him and his team before. So yeah, it's great to hear these names and that there's that collaboration happening. And as far as the tests for dementia, and that you mentioned some of the blood tests and whatnot, we just spoke with another researcher, Scott Roberts, and he was talking about how some of these tests are available to people, but they don't know it. And the tests right now are for people with like who've already been identified as having cognitive health issues or might have dementia, but in the future, you could imagine that they might be available as like a baseline, um,
Yes, absolutely.
assessment. Yeah,
I hate to speak because I'm not about these things from a clinical perspective because I'm not a clinician, and I know Scott is very much involved through the ADRC, I believe, the Michigan ADRC, in focusing on these issues. But it seems to me that through research you establish these essential elements, that down the line can lead to population health interventions, including kind of at the early stages of the disease. So
yeah,
there's a lot of hope in some of these kind of exciting biomarkers that are emerging as a potential for identification.
yeah, that's great. And then, for team science, I mean, it it sometimes you need to look at a problem from multiple perspectives, and so it's great that that a variety of researchers are involved. And so, why don't we talk about some of the major findings, and if you could say a bit more about the studies that you work on, like the ancillary studies, it just so that people understand, the age range and like they're focused in specific communities throughout the U.S. But yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Again, here I'm going to focus on the Hispanic Community Health Study, and
Mhm.
as you can expect from kind of a very large effort, research effort, like a cohort, study like the HCHS SOL, you get to a lot of research and a lot of findings come out. So I'm going to give a couple of examples just to kind of situate what we're doing in that context. But the just kind of briefly about the SOL. The SOL is not a nationally representative study. It's actually focused on four target areas in the U.S. that have a large presence of Latinos from a variety of backgrounds. These four centers are located in Miami, in Florida, in San Diego, in California, in Chicago, in Illinois, and in the Bronx, in New York. Again, initially it started as a cohort that included around 16,000 individuals from these varied backgrounds, and these folks kind of entered into the study in 2008. So the first wave of data collection was between 2008 and 2011. Then a second wave was done between 2014 and 2017, 18. And now we're in the process of collecting a third wave of data on these individuals. Now, unlike the HCHS SOL, SOL-INCA, and the other ancillary studies focused on cognitive aging, are more interested at this point in looking at kind of middle age risk and how it influences some of
Hmm.
these cognitive impairment measures. So, INCA, the original INCA, or INCA 1, which was done between 2015 and 2018 in terms of data collection, focused on folks that were originally at the baseline, at the Visit 1 study, 45 years and older, and were around 50 and older at the second point of data collection. And now, of course, the cohort is aging, so these folks are getting older, and the upper boundary of age now is around 86, 87. So we can start really looking at some of these disease outcomes like dementia that I mentioned earlier. To give you just a couple of examples of the type of work that's being done with the SOL-INCA. So I'll talk about two studies. The first was led by a PhD student in the SOL-INCA lab who just completed and finished his PhD. Dr. Kevin Gonzalez, looking at upstream sleep parameters of breathing and assessing how breathing dynamics, things like breathing rate or variability in breathing rate, how they're associated, which initially, through our literature review, we found that they were associated with changes in mood and some brain
Hmm.
activity. But we noticed that these relationships are not, well studied in the context of cognition, particularly in large community-based cohorts like the one that Seoul Inca offers. So Kevin was able to show that faster breathing rate and breathing rate variability, even in middle age, can be linked to kind of worse performance on both domain specific, those things like memory and executive function, as well as global cognitive performance. And also interestingly, that some of these associations vary between men and women, although the mechanisms of how this happens, we didn't get into that through the study. A second example that I would give is a study that was led by a former postdoc of the SOL-INCA lab, who's now an assistant professor at SDSU, looking at CVD risk factors, which are highly prevalent in the HCHS SOL cohort, and that's why this is an important kind of population to study. 60% of our participants had medium or high cardiovascular disease risk. So looking at CVD risk factors as well as MRI-based evidence of brain infarcts, so stroke-like evidence, and their association with some brain markers, structural measures, things like total brain volume, white matter hyperintensities, and so on. So Dr. Stickle was able to document that higher risk of CVD measured even 10 years prior to doing MRI was linked to several of these brain markers. And here again, she found evidence of differentiated risk in men and women. We were also able to show that the presence of infarcts, even small evidence of infarcts, are significantly associated with reduced total brain volume. And this is
Mm.
kind of to some extent clinically important because she was able to equate the effect of small brain infarcts to about 5-year increase in brain aging. So cardiovascular health matters, and this is a modifiable risk potentially, especially in midlife, and has kind of a substantial impact on aging and brain aging.
Yeah, wow. Yes. I mean, I think if you're just a curious person and you look up, the most common causes of death, heart health, heart issues it's still the most common cause of death. And so it's uh, even more impactful to think about how heart health affects brain health and cognitive health. Yeah, wow. So what are some of the challenges of the research process for you and your team?
So I think you've probably heard this before, but the most challenging aspect of a research process, of large studies like the SOL-INCA study, for example, or the HCHS SOL, is maintaining the infrastructure that allows for, such long-term investments in studying aging
Mm.
processes at the population level. Community connection to ensure that the individuals, that allow all this work to happen are appropriately recognized and involved in the research process. You need to have dedicated staff, without which none of this work would be possible. You need to have junior scientists whose excitement and energy and novel thinking kind of keeps you going. And of course, your own health and well-being so that you can ensure that you give back and continue to be excited about the work. So um, I'm going to give you another example. So I've talked a lot about SOL-INCA, but more recently, around 8 years ago, I've started getting involved in a project here at Michigan with the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's disease. I've been a desk person for nearly my entire career working on data. But I started getting involved with the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in McFadden as a community liaison and recruitment corps lead, focusing on the MENA community, the Middle Eastern North African community here in Southeast Michigan.
Mm.
And for those listening, this is the highest concentration of folks from these backgrounds in the United States. Um, and I have a co-lead on the west side of the state, Dr. Irving Vega, who's focused on the Latino community. So this has been extremely exciting to me. I've gotten more and more opportunities to go out into the communities that we study and we talk about, talk to folks through some of the awareness programs that we do on cognitive and brain aging, with partnership with the Alzheimer's Association, other community associations that are engaged with those communities, to create volunteer directories of individuals that become part of the research process. So not only am I kind of looking at the data of these individuals,
Yeah.
of 8 years now, I'm actually in the community trying to, talk to them, talk to those folks that literally contribute their blood, their sweat, their hair, their brain images, and all the things that enable researchers like me to do the work with the data. So the question was about challenge. I think time and energy needed to enable population health science to happen is really immense. And certainly nothing that could be done by individual researchers alone. But there's a lot of excitement and there's a lot of professional and personal satisfaction in that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I think that it's wonderful. I love hearing about research and research teams that care about serving the same communities that they're doing data collections within, because that means that those communities then will hopefully get to benefit from some of that work that's being done as well. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
So, what advice would you give to other researchers out there or people, even maybe in different industries, trying to use data collections like the Hispanic Community Health Study or SOL-INCA and performing data validation or just working with longitudinal data in general?
So um, I can speak for days on this, but I'm going to try to be short. Um, I think patience and incremental buildup. These are very large projects. So the patience and incremental buildup are essential for the kind of work that we do. I would say find a good group to work with. Something I learned, and I learned early in my career, again, through the mentorship of Hector Gonzalez, is to seek expertise through the networks that you have and shoot for long-term research relationships, not just, to achieve one paper or two papers or what have you. And to be productive with the data that you collect, you have to have a solid workflow for doing the work. So understand the nature of your existing workflow, how you like to work. Is it planned? Is it ad hoc? Is it reactionary? Just responding to mistakes that you do over time, and focus on how you can improve that workflow. That takes an initial time investment. So you have to focus on longer term improvement in efficiency of the process, and what kind of return on investment you put into establishing that workflow. I think having a good workflow internally streamlines your analytic process, and externally it can improve your collaborations. And nowadays, unlike when I started in this 20 years ago, there are lots of resources that allow for establishing solid workflow for data collection and data analysis.
Mhm.
Um, Now, in a team science environment, right, collaborations can be a hazard for breakages in a workflow. So you have to have a clear system with clear role definitions. Uh, I've had a lot of time to think about this. So clear role definitions, standards for how you interact and feed kind of some of the information that you create into that workflow and the established system. And you have to have mechanisms for coordination. And luckily, we have all that through the coordinating center for the HCHS Soul, which is at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I think being part of a solid group and making sure that your workflow corresponds with some of these rules that are established is essential. In SOL-INCA, we emphasize reproducibility. So and we recognize that reproducibility does not mean perfect. When folks think of reproducibility, they think of, oh man, I have to do extra work, I have to do all these things, and the work has to be perfect. But you don't have to be perfect. You have to recognize that you can improve the system over time, and that working on improvement is a lot easier when you start the process as opposed to postponing that. We started by creating just a simple set of rules that made sure that we have a binding for all the lab members and the trainees, and eventually the collaborators that work with us. Um, and we from the top, we tell folks that work in the lab that we're here to provide help, and that's part of the workflow. Everybody learns from everybody else. We
Yeah.
have more senior people, more junior people, but there's a lot of a collaborative process really that exists. Now, it's easy to say all this. I do
Mhm.
recognize that this is hard, but it builds over time. So I want to go back to the where I started this answer by saying that patience and incremental buildup are really kind of essential ingredients to establish a solid workflow that allows good data collection, great data analysis, excellent data validation, and then to ensure reproducibility and rigor in the work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really enjoy getting to ask these questions. And we use, pretty much the same questions across the board. And so I've gotten to hear different researchers' answers to this question, and I can tell you're a very detail-oriented and self-aware person. And I think that it's a really refreshing answer because I think a lot of times when we start something, we kind of hope, and then maybe from that hope, there's like this expectation of, oh, I'll be good at this or get this right pretty soon. And in reality, that's just not how things happen. If you're lucky, sometimes maybe they happen that way. But as you say, it takes uh, well, you didn't say repetition, but it takes trying, reflecting, trying again, and the patience. I think that's great.
Absolutely. But I also want there's a lot of hope in this because once you have an established process, it gets a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
In terms of kind of reusing some of these established methods to increase your productivity and make sure
Mhm.
that you're progressing. We are all in one way or another associated with academic settings, and the incentives, right,
Mhm.
of being an academic and some of the disadvantages that are embedded in the system don't allow for, at least initially, if you're, let's say, a tenure on a tenure track as an assistant professor, you want to be productive very quickly, right?
Yeah.
So you tend to focus a lot on that. And I just want to say that these two are not really contradictory. You can be very productive and be thinking kind of longer term in terms of how you establish your workflow.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So, we've talked a lot about team science and collaboration, and I like to ask our interviewees about what conferences and meetings they like to attend. So now I'm going to pose you this question. Are there any meetings or networks that you really have found valuable in your career that you want to talk about?
Oh, I'm a gerontologist, so the one that I love to attend and I attend all the time is the GSA, the Gerontological Society meeting. It's exciting. It's full of interesting people. It's full of thoughtful people. It's full of friendly people. It's very encouraging for young junior scientists that are interested in investing their time and effort into understanding the aging process and the life course processes that lead to healthy aging. So that's one of the meetings that I attend, and I definitely encourage people who are interested in aging to attend. The other one is the Alzheimer's Association meeting, the AAIC, which is happening pretty soon, and end of not end of summer, end of July, and that's another exciting meeting to me scientifically. I found a lot of kind of interesting ideas there. Um, and obviously it's a main venue for us through the SOL-INCA lab to disseminate some of the science that we do.
That's great. Yes. Hopefully, we will see you at GSA this year in Boston. Yeah.
That sounds great. Yes, I'm very excited about that.
Great. So, last question. What excites you about being a researcher now?
Yeah. So most of the excitement that I get now is from talking and working with junior scientists, from mentoring, from teaching. I teach in a clinical program, and I try to instill these fundamentals of research in folks that plan to become clinicians. Not a very easy task, but it's a challenging and exciting task. I also get a lot of excitement from doing the community work that I mentioned. Of course, the staples of being a researcher, the writing, the publishing, the being engaged in the day-to-day of the analyses, the thinking about the process and the working in a team environment. And to me, at this stage of my career, is working on grants with folk to continue, the potential for the work that we do.
Sure. Wow.
So all this provide a lot of professional joy and stress, but good stress. Stress that keeps you on your toes, keeps you sharp, keeps you excited, and I'm very thankful for those opportunities.
Thank you so much. Yes. Hopefully, all of these great challenges and experiences keep your own cognitive health, at its peak for a long time.
I hope
Uh,
so.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thanks to you, Catherine, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much to our guest and to our listeners for joining us on this podcast. You can find links to studies we referenced by viewing the description and content below. If you have questions or ideas, please email us at icpsr-nacda@umich.edu.